Joined now by Rinkwide's Jeff Paterson, our Canucks reporter, after a weekend where the Canucks grab 3 of 4 points with a couple of games that go beyond regulation in Detroit and Washington. Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing well, guys.
What did you make of the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, it had its moments. I don't think that they were exceptional, but it's kind of like that last homestand before the All-Star break where, there were moments in most of the games, and it's the same sort of thing on this road trip. Like, it's hard to argue at 2-1-1, and, they lost the one game in Boston, and they weren't very good, but I think they bounced back. Like the second period in Detroit, certainly, with a 3-1 lead, I thought this team had evolved beyond the point of letting it get away, but they did. And then I like the response in Washington, the early starts and the fact that they're giving up these early goals. That's not great, but there's just enough there. And look, it was a 2-2 tie going to the third period. And I'm thinking to myself, all these all-stars, like, yes, Washington's got Alex Ovechkin, but he's slowing down. I know he's scored and has scored in 5 straight, but I just thought in a 2-2 tie, one of the Canucks all-stars had to rise up. Now, it didn't happen in the third period, but sure enough, in overtime, they've got enough difference makers that even on a day where, like, that's about as quiet as JT Miller's been all season, I think. But put the puck on his stick in a scoring position with 5 seconds to go and pulls the trigger. So, it's funny on the road trip as a whole, JT Miller has 2 points and has been remarkably quiet. His 2 points, they're the game winners in Carolina and in Washington, where they've snapped 2-2 ties late, a third period goal in Carolina and the overtime winner against Washington. So I think it just speaks to the fact that, Thatcher Demko is really good. He's part of that group as well, part of the leadership group, part of the All-Star gang. I thought he did what he had to do to keep them in it, made some saves there, and ultimately they were just looking for that one opportunity, and they got it, and they skated to Washington, 3 of 4 points on the weekend, and 5 of 8 so far on this trip, and a chance to go into Chicago now, the easiest game of the 5 on the road trip. They get the win there, guys, and they come home with 7 of 10 points, even though there are still issues and hand-wringing and angst around this team right now for the way that it's played. But all they do is find ways to pick up points along the way.
Which is a fantastic trip, and we talked about this trip. It was going to be difficult on the front end because of the quality of opponents, and it was going to be difficult on the weekend because of the back-to-back against 2 desperate clubs. And I think we're starting to see that a little bit here, Jeff. We're starting to see the Canucks encounter teams that have a whole lot to play for, and the intensity's ramping up. And
they're coming at number 1, too.
And frankly, I think that can only help them here as they get ready for the playoffs down the stretch in their final 30.
Yeah, and that's why I come back to sort of my thoughts are the same as the homestand where, would you like them to play perfect hockey? Of course, but the other teams out there, they're battling. They want those points every bit as much. And so even if they're not at their best, this team's ability to find ways ultimately to pull out victories is commendable. And so, they've been pretty good about not letting up, but I'm sure Rick Tocchet will bang that drum going into Chicago where the Blackhawks are brutal and, they still don't have Connor Bedard. He's getting closer, but that's a should win for the Vancouver Canucks. And, at the end of a business trip, let's see if their business-like approach and just get those wins, come on home. The other thing to mention, guys, is that with the win in Washington, the Canucks are done with the Eastern time zone now. Like, the schedule really turns in their favor, not so much in terms of quality opponents, because they still see a lot of the top teams in the West, but by my math, they've got 29 games remaining, only 6 outside the Pacific time zone now. So front end loaded with a lot of travel. We've talked a lot about that, but the payoff was, all those home games, including a 9-game homestand for the month of March. So they did really well, too, against the Eastern opponents on the road in the East this year. They went 10-4-2 in 16 games. Like, that's a huge part of why their road record is what it is and why their overall record is what it is.
The acquisition of Elias Lindholm led many to believe, and I think rightly so, that, okay, now the Canucks have 2 sets of frontline pairs, and you could rejig it however you wanted as to who the pairs were. We assumed it would be Miller, Besser, Lindholm, and Paterson. Maybe not. What do you make of the separation of Lindholm and Paterson and sort of, hey, it doesn't spell out a lotto line, but it's effectively like the lotto line, loading up with that top line?
Yeah, a little surprised that the 2 Eliases, or Elias and Elias, lasted 2 games, and then Rick Tocchet decided to go for a different look over the weekend. It's very much a work in progress, and I don't think that can be a surprise to anybody. the team is holding its head above water in the 4 games that he's played here. Had the nice debut, obviously, in Carolina, but those are his only points, and they both came on the power play. So 4 games in, nothing to show at 5-on-5. And part of that, I think, is the fact that he's bounced around a little bit. But, in terms of his usage, looking at his ice time, 4th among all Canucks so far in these 4 games in the amount that he's played, and 4th among Canuck forwards in shorthanded ice time. So he's getting used and used a lot in different situations. It's been terrific on the faceoff circle, 57% so far in the early going here. And that's as advertised. I mean, that's one of his strong suits and gives him that right shot, right side faceoff guy. But at some point, you want to see him sort of settle in, find some rhythm and a bit of a routine with some line mates. And I'm surprised that Paterson and Lindholm didn't get a little bit of a longer run. As I mentioned, it's been a quiet road trip for JT Miller. It's been a really quiet road trip for Brock Besser, who hasn't scored yet and hasn't looked all that dangerous. He'll be heard from again before the season is through, but little bit of a rut, maybe the first time all season for Brock Besser. So, it's a case of Lindholm, a new guy coming in, but also joining a cast of characters that aren't necessarily at the tops of their games right now as well. So I think some experimentation is going to continue here. And then a guy like Nils Höglander becomes a bit of a wild card in this, that finally, after all of the howling in this market, for him to get an opportunity higher in the lineup, gets to play with Elias Pettersson, scores in both games over the weekend. Beautiful goal in Washington, nice deflection goal against the Detroit Red Wings as well. So I'd like to see that get a little bit more of a run. And I would just think that, Rick Tocchet has used that committee approach on defense, and maybe it's going to be a bit more of that committee approach up front until he hits on something that he thinks has a little bit of staying power.
So answer me the poll. Who should play with Paterson, Höglander, Lindholm, or both?
Well, I think Höglander for sure. I'm all about that for the time being. And it's funny, too, that, not that Elias Pettersson, although he had the big second period in Detroit, but finally they moved Ilya Mikheyev off that line, and he gets a winger that's productive right away. So I just wonder, what's possible for Höglander if he gets any kind of run with Elias Pettersson? I mean, 16 goals, lower in the lineup, none in the power play, and primarily with guys that haven't been producing a ton themselves. Now, all of a sudden, if he gets a chance to be stapled to the wing with Elias Pettersson, look out. Höglander may take off. And there's enough time left in this season, 25 goals, not at all. I think that's kind of the pace that he's on. So not out of the question at all that Nils Höglander could be a 25-goal scorer. And look, at some point, maybe we see the 3 Swedes put together and get Lindholm back there with Pettersson and Höglander. And what does that look like? I think you know what you've got in a guy like Pius Suter, who can sort of seamlessly plug some gaps for you. And if you had to go back to Miller, Besser, and Suter, I think you could do worse than that for the Vancouver Canucks. So maybe that's the top 6 that we're looking at here. We haven't seen Pettersson, Lindholm, Höglander yet, but maybe that's next up in the sort of rotation for Rick Tocchet here.
I'm going to take, as you noted on Twitter, Jeff, they've given up the first goal in 6 straight games here, including 3 in the first minute and change here in a row. 32 seconds into Boston, 45 seconds into Detroit, and a minute 8 at Washington. I'm going to go counterintuitive here, though. Jeff, at the midway point, they were scoring first in 2/3 of their games, right? It was the formula. Get up early and either overwhelm them or nurse home the lead that you get. Frankly, in what's left of the regular season, with no one quite nipping at your heels just yet, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing for them to learn to play when they're down in hockey games early, because we didn't see a whole lot of that through the first half of the schedule.
Yeah, and Tocchet was asked about that at the tail end of the homestand, because they fell behind St. Louis and had to rally. They fell behind Columbus and had to rally. I think there are limits to your theory, though. And 6 straight, they might want to swing that back in the other way. And the fact that they're giving up those goals so early, it's easy to say, they're not ready for hockey games. I don't think that's the case. I mean, the shorthanded goal in Boston was just brain cramps all around by your top players. On Saturday, it was Tyler Myers has to make a better defensive play than he did on Lucas Raymond. And then yesterday it was Myers and Cole. So, there's different characters involved here. I don't think that this is Rick Tocchet doesn't have them prepared, or that they're taking their opponents lightly. I think this is just a kind of like the run of shorthanded goals. It happened. It'll be addressed. They're not going to give up a goal in the first minute every game, but it is a little bit startling to see it happen as often as it has. But to your broader point, Matt, I think, look, you get to the playoffs, you're not going to open the scoring every game. You're going to find yourself down. Those are good opponents you're playing. And so there is some value, I think, in Rick Tocchet having to make some tactical decisions that if it snaps his team to attention, whatever the case, they rallied and they got a single point. I mean, they rallied and they got the lead in Detroit and let it get away, but they still get a point there, and they rally and they get the win against the Washington Capitals. So, it is one of those things that they can put in their back pocket and recognize that if they give up an early goal, if they fall behind, not the end of the world. They know they've got the firepower, that they just kind of have to stick to the staples that Tocchet always talks about and play their way. And ultimately, they can still find success. I think when I look at Sunday's game, if there was a small disappointment, it was that I thought they played all right. A 2-2 tie, they get a power play with 3 minutes to go, right? Puck over the glass, like on a platter for them. Would have liked to have seen them put the hammer down there, but didn't happen. Power play's gone a little bit too quiet here. We've seen that happen from other stretches as well, but they've got enough weapons and enough ways to beat you that it doesn't hurt them ultimately, but want to see that power play, especially integrating Elias Lindholm into the mix. Want to see that power play get up and cooking again here soon.
Second unit had a nice shift. Was it yesterday, I believe?
Yep. The first power play of the game. They were out there, and I think some of that's probably some messaging from Rick Tocchet as well, that the first unit's been giving up shorthanded goals, hasn't been cashing in. Give the second unit a look, and Dakota Joshua got some power play time as well. So the only thing that's missing from that second unit is the 16-goal scorer.
Yeah, Nils.
Yes. But
did we see how excited Hronek and Garland were to play that power play? They looked like kids in candy.
Well, speaking of Hronek, he scored one of the best goals of the season. That D coming out of the box. That 7-minute PK, albeit it doesn't end up coming in a full-blooded win, but is that one of the top moments of the season for not only that unit but just for the team? I mean, killing off 7 straight minutes of power play is something else.
Yeah, I mean, the 5, and then you're right. It looked like they were going to get out of that unscathed, and then the high stick, and so tack on 2 more minutes. Look, it was a bit of a coming out party for Noah Juulsen on the weekend. Like, that guy strung back-to-back games, and really has had a fine season since the middle of November. Like, I don't know, credit to him. I don't know if it's all the credit to him or the coaching staff for working with him, but he really has found a niche as a penalty killer on this hockey club. And in that 5-minute major with Zadorov tossed from the hockey game, nobody on the Canucks killed more of the 5-minute major than Noah Juulsen. And he had a great breakup of a backdoor tap in that was a sure goal for the Red Wings. And he made a terrific defensive play and, cleared the puck in the same motion. Yesterday, the quick up to Connor Garland on the first Canuck goal. So good for Noah Juulsen. Again, maybe it's an understanding that Carson Soucy's getting closer, and at some point we'll get back in the lineup, and Juulsen's trying to, keep his foot in the door here and keep his spot in the lineup. Whatever the case, he was good. Dakota Joshua's had a fine season on the penalty kill. The fact that they're starting to use Lindholm an awful lot now since the trade, I think you're seeing some of his utility is there on the penalty kill as well. But yeah, I mean, high leverage situation. It was a 1-1 tie. Ill-advised play, obviously, by Zadorov, and I don't blame the league. You're trying to get headshots out. I think 2 games was probably fair. I kind of figured he'd get at least 1. I thought maybe, the bulk of a 1-1 tie, and then Sunday's game, but I had no issues with a 2-game suspension for Nikita Zadorov. So interesting that he gets back in the lineup on Thursday against those same Detroit Red Wings, and we'll see if there's any carryover, because that game had a lot more feeling than I expected for a Saturday morning. 2 teams that hadn't seen each other all season, only see each other twice, but there was some feeling there, and we'll see if that carries over into the rematch on Thursday. But yeah, that was a really nice sequence for the Vancouver Canucks that propelled them to the big second period.
Frankly, I thought they defended better on that PK than they did at 5-on-5 in times over the weekend. Jett Woo, do you think he's going to get a look here? Do you think he gets into a game?
Yeah, this is fascinating. And I think anytime you're within a month of the trade deadline, you have to consider a whole bunch of options here. Is this a reward for his play down in Abbotsford? Is there something going on beyond the Zadorov suspension in terms of banged up bodies? Because he's a right shot defenseman, which, you already had Mark Fredman here, and Friedman's playing on his offside, and now you're adding another righty. So that surprised me a little bit in that regard. But also, could this be any sort of showcase? Like, if ever there was an opponent that you could plug a player like this in, it's against the Blackhawks. Jett Woo's probably 3rd on the Blackhawks depth chart at the NHL level, the way that their season's going. But why not? Why not take the opportunity? This guy's been in the system a while, has played himself back into the mix as a, tweener at the very least, and a guy that probably has earned an opportunity at the National Hockey League level. I hope that this isn't just bring him in and, a bit of a nod to him to get a day on the NHL roster at the end of a road trip. Why not against the Chicago Blackhawks? Give him a little love for Jett Woo here the day or two before Valentine's.
A little bit of color on that. The left-handed defensemen are all injured for the Abbey Canucks. So, your options are pretty slim right now. To call guys up, but guys like you could go Matt Irwin would be the only option, really. But everybody else is dinged right now, so it's a bunch of righties. So I think it's just who's available more than anything. The question is, do they want to see him over Fredman? I guess would be the question. Did Fredman do anything too dastardly that demands him out of the lineup? I don't think so.
He played 11 minutes. Again, they basically went with 5 defensemen for much of that hockey game. Quinn Hughes on the back half of back-to-backs playing 29 minutes and change and 3 minutes of overtime, as Quinn Hughes likes to do. And so not a surprise there. But yeah, Fredman, and tough situation for him. The guy hadn't played an NHL game since November the 30th. And, he's been a loyal soldier and he's stayed on the payroll. And I think they're worried that if they tried to waive him to the minors, that a right shot defenseman would probably get claimed around the National Hockey League. So they wanted to keep him in the fold, and went down. He played those 6 games in Abbotsford, but I didn't think he looked out of place, but it's 11 minutes. Could Jett Woo give you those same 11 minutes against an inferior opponent like the Chicago Blackhawks? I'd like to think so. I'd like to think the Canucks, could insulate Jett Woo enough at the tail end of a road trip like this one against a Chicago team that has been shut out. I believe it's in 4 of its last 8 games. They don't mount much offense. They don't mount a huge threat. Why not? This seems like the perfect opportunity to plug a guy like Jett Woo in and give him his National Hockey League debut.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. Jett Woo's going to require waivers to go back down. He's not waiver ineligible anymore. So that does make this call up a little bit interesting, doesn't it? A 23-year-old right shot defenseman that you'll have to send back down?
Right. So is this a question of another team wanting to see Jett Woo play in the National Hockey League ahead of, again, spitballing here, but all of these things are in play a month ahead of the trade deadline.
Yeah, we'll see.
Week ahead, Jeff, which is busy. Touched on it a little bit, but what do you anticipate here in the week ahead?
Yeah, they should be able to get past Chicago, take the win, and bring it on home. And then, home for 2. And we saw that Detroit pushed them and gave them everything they could handle. Then the big one on Saturday, the first look at the Winnipeg Jets all season long, the first of 3 remaining against the Jets. And then right back out on the road, the quick turnaround for the Vancouver Canucks, and a road trip that includes Dayton, Colorado. So we've said this for a while that, not a week's going to go by here over the second half of the season where there isn't one of or a couple of big conference games or divisional opponents. And we're going to start to see that Winnipeg, Colorado, and on it goes. But it's funny because I really didn't think much of the Thursday game against the Detroit Red Wings, but after what we saw, and and now there's a little bit of intrigue there. But I am looking forward to seeing the Jets. Whether it's the goaltending matchup, whether it's a couple of great defensemen in Josh Morrissey and Quinn Hughes, or all the firepower up front. Winnipeg's having a hell of a season. The Canucks obviously have done their part here, so that should be a fun Saturday night at Rogers Arena with the Winnipeg Jets.
And Jeff, you mentioned 6 games outside the Pacific time zone earlier. Well, they got 2 outside the Pacific time zone Monday, Tuesday next week. So that number's 4 in 8 days. In 8 days, they'll have 4 games left outside the Pacific time zone.
Tomorrow in Chicago as well. So they
right. Sorry, pardon me. 3.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, there you go.
And another Monday matinee next week.
Yes.
In Minnesota against the Wild. Marvelous stuff, Jeff. Busy weekend for Rinkwide. Will be a busy week ahead. Thank you for this. Catch up Friday.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.